This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warrenshaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this is our coveted Baseline Eastern Conference preview. We are but weeks away from NBA tip-off. Another exciting NBA season is on the precipice, and we are just so amped up, ready to talk about one of the more alluring conferences to have the conversation, because there were so many moving parts, especially over the last couple of weeks. Player movements that have obviously shifted the paradigm of discussion about who we think should be representing the Eastern Conference for this year's upcoming NBA Finals. Let me go and roll out the red carpet to my right-hand man, who I've been doing it for so long. My brother from another mother, Mr. Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. What's good, Mr. Shaw? Welcome back to the fold. Ready to talk some Eastern Conference basketball again, my brother.
Yeah, back in some ways for the Eastern Conference. They are now the lesser conference yet again after having some dominance, depending on, some people's opinion, but not quite as deep as they are over in the Western Conference. And this one's a little bit more top heavy, but we'll get into all of that here on the Baseline this week. Exciting episode again, as the NBA season is right around the corner yet again, brother. Happy to be here with you as always, man, jumping in here for another one of our conference previews.
Absolutely, man. And listen, when we try to do these previews, we don't, putz around with it, man. We got so many different angles and perspectives and possible storylines that are derived from the conversations that we have that we don't waste any time with it. So, we're going to get right into it, man. As always, we appreciate you and yours for hopping on board with us this week. Be sure to get at my man Shaw, at Shaw Sports NBA, or get at me at GameFace Lee, the show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. Available on all the major platforms. If you want to check out this episode and any of our previous episodes, make sure you go to www.thebaselinenba.com. That's the home site. Also, if you're catching us on the video platform and you see the nice blue and white logo, you know that we rocks with the 19 Media Group. 19 Media Group be running these content streets. So we encourage you guys to go to www.19mediagroup.com to check out not just our show, but the plethora of great shows that are out there, especially the great sports podcasts that we have ready to go, man. I mean, they're all lined up, man, ready to talk about not just their team, but the NBA in general. So if you want your fill, you want the inside track, you want the insight, you need to come check out the family here at 19 Media Group, man. We got you ready for this upcoming NBA season. But as always, man, the best of the best got to lead it off, and that will be the Baseline boys. And we're introducing the Eastern Conference, so we're not going to waste any time with it. Let's break down the rules of engagement when you're dealing with us, right? When we talk about the Eastern Conference preview and how we go about doing it. We basically look at this in a tier type like system, okay? I know old school way of doing things is we break down each and every single team within each and every single division, but times have changed. The dynamic of the Eastern Conference has changed. The dynamic of the NBA has changed. And so now we're no longer looking at it as just whether or not you're good enough just to even win your division, albeit it does bode well if you're someone to come out on top of your division. But I think what it comes down to is, are you good enough to play yourselves in an opportunity for you to be able to participate in the tournament? Because that's really all it takes. And if you watched last year's NBA playoffs and how the Miami Heat just said, all you got to do is just play my Biggie song. Give me one more chance. And every time the Miami Heat enters into the tournament, they cause chaos. They cause havoc. They upset everybody's, betting system, betting morale. They just F it up all over the place, right? But that's what teams do. You let a team in. That's why we have what we have, right? So the way that we have this listed, man, and it's real simple. We got the teams that probably not going to make it. We got the teams that maybe played out. They have a chance. They could possibly play themselves in, but they probably have played themselves out. Then we got the teams that do play themselves in, right? They're good enough that they should be among one of the participants in the Eastern Conference playoff picture. Then you got the true players. They may not be the ones that we're saying are the contenders, but they damn sure are going to give those teams that are in the top tier a run for their money. And then we got what we call the money boss players, the conference bosses, the guys that we think have as good a chance as any to wind up being the Eastern Conference champion. So 5 tiers to break down, a lot of teams to discuss and where they all fit in, man. And Shaw, I don't know about you, man, but I'm excited about the idea, the notion of slotting some of these teams where they may be and where we think they might wind up ending by season's end.
Well, you know, the thing we do here, right? It's the eternal optimism of the NBA season. There's promise for all the fan bases out there. So we are sure to piss some people off. And how dare you say our team is over here and not over there, you know, because the season hasn't started yet and everybody's in the best shape of their lives, and so are the fans in terms of their optimism as well, too. So we're here to probably give some people a little bit of a reality pill. Maybe we'll be wrong at the end of the season, and we're not too humble or not too sad to say, hey, you know what? If we were wrong, we were wrong. But this is how we see it going into the season, and we'll see if our tiers end up being correct.
Absolutely. So let's get right into it, Shaw. Let's first talk about our bottom tier, the ones that we just don't think have any chance of making it into the playoffs. Now, let me preface this by saying, just because our belief is that these teams are not ready to be in the playoff picture doesn't mean that they're not talented enough to upset the logic or upset the system or upset the way things go. Maybe in some shape or form, given how this team progresses, they could look as good as any team, right? Because to your point, what you said earlier before, Shaw, is that this team has reverted somewhat back to the lesser conference because of all of the talent shifting over to the Western. But when you look at the well-rounded teams and the teams that are going to look like there's some potential and promise, it doesn't necessarily mean that any of these teams that we're talking about here can't show some life and really put certain, put other teams that we'll be talking about on their backside a little bit, like checking their, checking their shoulder every game or two when it comes down to the final stretch of games, possibly by season's end.
Yeah, I agree with that 1000%. And once we get into it, you'll even see kind of like some of the thinking. And I had a hard time putting two teams in particular, kind of in the no chance realm, but somebody's got to be there. And all of these things that are going to be qualifiers. People could get injured. There could be other trades that happen throughout the conference with these specific teams or other teams that put them up or down one way or the other. So that's what it's all about. Again, going into the season as we record, this is how we feel about it. So we'll see where it all lands out when, the season ultimately starts.
All right. So let's talk about our tier 5 teams, right? The ones that we don't think have any chance of making the Eastern Conference playoff picture. We have the Washington Wizards, the Charlotte Hornets, and the Detroit Pistons. Those are our Vince McMahon-ish no chances. I'm going back to my, attitude era, Degeneration X. No chance teams. I'm gonna basically hedge my bets on the Detroit Pistons. I think you and I agree, Shaw. The Detroit Pistons, to me, look like of the 3 teams, have the most talent if put together properly, and we'll see how Monty Williams makes this happen. Of those teams, the Detroit Pistons have the likelihood that they could either be certified no chance, or they could literally be a team that they could be anywhere from no chance to probably played out and maybe even damn well good enough to play in if you've got the right version of Monty Williams and the right components that he's working with that type of talent that's on that roster.
Yeah, so the roster is a little uneven, but I think there's a little bit of deference I want to give to Monty Williams and his ability to maybe coach this team up. So this is the team I have the hardest mindset of saying, okay, they have no chance, because I feel like there's a lot of factors going into their season, especially with the return of Cade Cunningham, adding Monty Williams onto the side of the bench, Isaiah Stewart continuing to progress and grow, Jaden Ivey going into his second year of basketball. They got a great rookie in Azir Thompson as well too. Bogdanovich is still on this roster, so gives them a veteran presence. They still have the promise of what James Wiseman can be. Whatever you think about Marvin Bagley, I guess, as well too. So there's a couple of guys on this team. I think when you all put it together, it's like, yeah, could they maybe take a little bit more of a step? But to me, they still need some more shooting. And I don't know if Monty's going to be able to get them to get there right away. So that's why I'm leaving them in this tier for now. But they have to me, the most upside of anybody else in this tier of potentially getting out, as you alluded to.
Well, and I think the other thing as well too is the health of Cade Cunningham is so critical. So you remember when we had our conversation sometime last year about, this could have been an opportunity that Jaden Ivey, can step in and really help. I don't want to say Austin, but maybe assist, right? in balancing out the leadership capabilities that I think we all know this is Cade Cunningham's team. And I think, the way that Jaden Ivey played last year kind of proved that. Like, it still seems like he's very young, still seems like he's got a lot of maturity to go. I think if you're leaning on this team's, maturation and direction, it's going to be on the mind, the mentality, and the work ethic of a Cade Cunningham, right? And given what he's also done in this offseason, participating in the FIBA World Cup, the offseason training that he's, obviously been showing you, he recognizes that this is his team and he's doing everything to kind of prove that to you. I really think that that is the key for the Detroit Pistons in their ability to, you know, I guess you could say mask a little bit of what is going to take some time for them to really be better at doing, right? To your point, shooting the basketball, they're among the worst as field goal percentage goes. Not so great as far as shooting the three or their attempts at shooting the three. I think a lot of those things, they're not going to be completely covered up because you've got a Kate Cunningham. But I think with a player like him and a mindset like his, some of these guys I think may wind up competing a lot better than what we saw last year when under the helm of, Dwight Casey, just couldn't get those guys to compete. And even with the kind of mismatch of components that they have, I still think that there is room for them to grow and definitely a coach who has the patience, but also has the sternness to direct them to do what's necessary to win those games, I think will allow them to get a couple more wins than the 17-win season that they had last year.
Yeah, they'll be improved. And again, Joe Harris also added to this team to kind of help with that shooting that I was talking about. Do they have enough, on that? But they also have a couple of those guys that are potential trade pieces if they wanted to, again, stockpile some more draft picks, if you will, to maybe combine for a bigger trade at some point. Right now, Cade kind of stands out as the guy. Then after that, is it Ivy? Is it Jalen Duren coming into his second year? Can he be a plus rebounder and figure out how to score a little bit and not make some of those rookie mistakes that he made last year? So again, there's some promise here. Isaiah Stewart, as I alluded to a little bit earlier, he's still growing into his role. So I like the Detroit Pistons overall. And like I said, have the best chance of improving on their win total from last year, but also maybe even ascending out of this year altogether.
All right, real quick, Shaw, let's talk about the two teams that I guess because of that premise that we have on the Pistons, we're saying that the Washington Wizards and the Charlotte Hornets, while they have some talented pieces, they're not talented enough as a team to give us the confidence that they are going to, arise or, leapfrog any of the other teams that we'll be talking about later on in this show, right? Like, yes, the Charlotte Hornets, they've got Ball, right? They've got Miller, but outside of that, it's still a mess. There's still really a lot of question marks on what makes this team click, what's going to make them good. I still think health is going to clearly be an issue, especially with their star pieces. And then you look at the Washington Wizards, given the circumstances of what the team has inherited and what they gave up, it's not to say that this team can't be good. It just means that they're just not going to be good enough to be able to beat some of the better teams, just simply because we don't know what this team really looks like and what their mentality reflects because there's so many new pieces that are coming on board. Now, you got Kyle Kuzma still part of this veteran-laden team and stuff like that in some regards, but I still just don't see collectively as a whole where the Washington Wizards are going to be that talented enough in order to make up for what they gave up in losing Beal and Porzingis.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a growth year for Washington for sure. I love the addition of Tyus Jones, though. I think everyone says one of the better backup point guards. Now he's going to get to be a starter, so hopefully he can keep their turnovers down. But I can see a situation he and Jordan Poole maybe not getting along if Jordan is trying to do what Jordan Poole does and which is score the basketball. His efficiency is probably going to go into the tanker this year, and he and Kuz have already started to build some great rapport and relationship, at least off the floor. But I don't know how many wins that's going to equate to right now, right? And Daniel Gafford in the power forward / center spot for them. So again, a couple of nice pieces here. Avdiva and Corey Crispert and all those guys. Again, it's just being a growth year here too. But I think what you're looking for them is Poole and Kuzma to figure out, all right, can you grow into be leaders of a team that ultimately wins and not just puts up stats? And I think that will be the maturation process for them this year. That's a good year for Washington, in my opinion. Do those guys grow into leadership roles in addition to being, statistical producers? And then on the Charlotte side, just a lot of, like you said, the injury stuff is very much in play. How does Miles Bridges come back into the fold there? What's really the status of Gordon Hayward? Do they finally try to move on from him? I'm worried about Brandon Miller in this regard because I just don't know if he's going to get enough touches and shots, in this to really be an impactful rookie, especially with LaMelo coming back. So while this is an exciting basketball team with LaMelo there, and don't forget my guy Scary Terry still on that roster too. I just don't know that this is going to be a positive year for Charlotte when it comes to W's. But also they started to turn things around toward the end of last year, despite all their injuries. So maybe they can build on some of that momentum, but I'd be hard pressed to see them kind of advance into the upper echelon in any capacity into like the play-in field of this conference.
All right, you're tuned to the Baseline. Callie, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, and this is our coveted Baseline Eastern Conference previews. We get ourselves ready for the upcoming NBA season. So before we get into Tier 4 real quick, Shaw, I'm just curious, which team do you think winds up with the least wins out of the conference?
Washington.
Okay.
Washington.
Yeah, all right. But do you see, because what we're saying is there's going to be at least they were 35 wins last year. So the drop off is going to be pretty bad for this team, right? Or are we saying that the total of the over under on, least wins out of the Eastern Conference is going to be more than 17, which is where the Detroit Pistons were last year?
I think Washington gets into that probably like they'll probably be in like the 25 to 28. I don't even know what the over-unders in terms of odds are. Maybe we should look that up, really quickly as well too. But I see Washington as a 25 to 28 win team per se. And again, they're just going to scare the hell out of some people. I just think they're going to lack some execution down the stretch of things. And I think Charlotte and Detroit are a little bit more overall talented and have more continuity for the most part to their roster in terms of the players on the roster than Washington does. So that's why I'm kind of leaning towards those other teams being a little bit better than Washington will be. But I don't think the Wizards are going to be a team in the teens when it comes to W's this season. And
I like the fact that with Monty at the helm, they're going to be better than 17 wins if you're Detroit. So I think the threshold for them is, high end 20s, maybe into the 30s. And to me, that would be reasonable. But it would also require that teams like the Charlotte Hornets probably stay fast, or like the Washington Wizards, who I said 35 wins, the drop off is probably going to be 10 or more wins lesser to be somewhere within that range, respectively. All right, Shaw. So in that transition of what we were talking about, we're going to be talking about now the teams that we think have the potential to play themselves in, but ultimately might wind up playing themselves out, right? Like we know that they're good enough, but there may be some competitiveness when we look at the way that these teams are structured in their ability to be considered as true contender type players, right? Type teams. So we're looking at the Chicago Bulls, the Brooklyn Nets, Toronto Raptors, and the Orlando Magic. Now, look, it wasn't too long ago. The Orlando Magic was not particularly a good team, but they have evolved. A lot of it has been predicated on moving past certain players. I think that they've been still waiting on to come in and really help this team. And now with Paolo Banchero, their rookie of the year, you look at the Orlando Magic, they really could be a dangerous team as far as shaking things up with where teams might wind up landing or being when it comes to the Eastern Conference playoff picture.
Yeah. I think when it comes to Orlando, as you alluded to, Paolo brings, he's kind of lifting all tides here too, but so is Franz Wagner. And I think those two guys are nice building blocks for where Orlando is at. They're very excited about the rookie and Anthony Black as well too. So I don't know how that will rub Markelle and Cole Anthony, how that will ultimately go. But I think from a talent perspective, they're ready to kind of, stop kind of just knocking on the door. And don't forget Jalen Suggs is still on this team as well too. So I really like Orlando's overall growth. They scared some teams in the Eastern Conference last year in terms of their ability to be competitive. They just weren't able to keep it consistent. You add in another veteran guy like Joe Ingles as well too. I keep saying this, whatever you think about Jonathan Isaac, he'll also be back into this and hopefully ready to contribute at a more consistent pace. And I think they have the makings of a team that's ready to kind of start trending towards at least play-in territory in the Eastern Conference.
All right, so that makes them a very dangerous team, right? So of the tier 4 teams, Shaw, we're saying this because two of these teams may not wind up, participating in the tournament, right? Right. We've seen the Toronto Raptors. They've managed to put themselves in this position year in, year out. And that's because they can lean on the quality play, and they leaned on Nick Nurse. And there was always kind of like this carryover from Dwayne Casey's coaching in those heyday years up until when they finally won the championship through Nurse, that this team always had something a little bit left over, a little bit left over. Well, part of that component now is gone, right? Van Fleet's gone. Nurse is gone. Now this is about Siakam, and it's about the direction that the young talent needs to be at, and whether or not they could, Scotty Barnes. And so to me, this is a team that's kind of in between. Why is it that we don't completely feel confident, or do we feel confident that they still have as good a chance as any to be among one of those participators in the play-in when it comes to the Toronto Raptors?
Well, Masai even alluded to that there were some issues going on there last year, and whether you want to put that at the feet of Nick Nurse, who's also obviously gone and moved on to Philadelphia here now, or just some of the players just in general, or the combination of both. He said that there was some selfishness in place there, which is interesting. Siakam's is up for a contract renewal, and they'll probably play this season now, and then see how they can lure him back. And ultimately with the new collective bargaining agreement and the rules, he'll get a little bit more money than per year than he can right now. But I'm confused by this team. They played a little bit better after they acquired Dr. Pirtle at the center position to move Siakam to a more natural 5 and not worry about Boucher and Achua and all those guys playing full time at the 5 spot. But this is a team that is still somewhat talented, but I don't know if they have enough shooting on it as well too. You lose Fred VanVleet for nothing. Dennis Schroeder comes in to kind of take that spot. Scotty Barnes is going to be doing a lot of ball handling for them this year as well too, as he started to do last year. But the roster is like it's not necessarily uneven, but I think it's still a little bit incomplete as to them realizing their overall potential and even figuring out how they're going to play here now under a new coach in Toronto as well too. So that's why I'm comfortable with them here being kind of in play-in territory where they were last year. But things could go well because they do have athletic guys and they have lengthy guys as well too. And they can put those things together. And if their new coach kind of gets it in the way where they are better at creating some offense here. And I don't really know how much you feel about Schroeder and Barnes and their ability to create. But if those things kind of come into play, then they can be a little bit tougher out than I'm giving them credit for currently right now.
Well, I guess to me, it really just depends on, to your point, what is the direction that this team truly wants to take? You can make the argument that they have a very exciting front court, and they should take advantage of having as exciting a front court as you could possibly have right now, in the Eastern Conference. I'm not going to go on a limb and talk about this being, in the whole NBA, because Siakam at times has his moments where he doesn't step up and he doesn't establish himself as being one of those premier swing forwards in the game. And then you have Scotty Barnes, who you can clearly tell that there's still that maturation process, but there's so much upside to him. And it would be interesting to see if Rajakovic is going to be able to utilize that as their strength rather than utilizing it as a way to kind of bridge the gap on what you're thinking potentially you're going to get now that you have Dennis Schroeder running the point, right? I think this is going to be a transition year. If there's ever a time that you want to see transition equal to success for the Raptors, it has to be on this team's ability to play defense, right? And that, to me, I think that they've taken a step back regressively, like year over year over year. They have not been as potent as a defensive team as I think. And what helps kind of make it even worse is the fact that they just don't score the basketball nearly as much, or don't have that premier guy that they can lean on that can always get you those buckets like they leaned on Kawhi Leonard, who helped Kyle Lowry, who helped Van Fleet, who helped Siakam. They don't have that. So it's either going to be Siakam or it's going to be Barnes. But if you're going to wait for that to come to fruition, you can't tell me that, okay, your bridge gap is Schroeder. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah. It can't fly like that. So it'll be interesting to see what the Toronto Raptors do. And I think, to your point, Shaw, that's what makes it scary for the Toronto Raptors, is they could very well be a team that could play themselves in with the potential and the talent that they have, or very well can get themselves knocked out of it simply because the system and everything else that goes along with what's happening in this transition might lead them to lesser wins, have them looking, basically looking outside rather than being on the inside.
Yeah, well, we'll talk. And I'm interested particularly in how they matriculate offensively. I think they'll be one of the better teams defensively because I think they have a lot of length and guys who are cagey in that capacity. But can they keep OG Anunoby happy, or do they finally need to move on from him in some capacity? Is a trade coming? His name has been floated about for the last 2 years. So all of those things kind of are permeating the Raptors orbit here. But everybody, I think, in the league was perplexed at their inability to be more successful than they were last season.
Absolutely. Let's transition now to two teams that we don't have any doubt about what they could potentially be as far as getting into. It's just that it just seems like everything just tops out from there, right? Like there's no confidence when people think about the Chicago Bulls and the Brooklyn Nets as far as knocking off the better teams, right? That we'll be talking about in the, not in the rest of the show. But when you look at the Chicago Bulls and the Brooklyn Nets, it just seems like there's stagnation there. And even when the Brooklyn Nets, for example, had the creme de la creme of players, and everybody, I know harping on the failure of the experiment with regards to Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. The one thing that I think people continually keep forgetting is that the Brooklyn Nets as an organization have always looked to buy their way to a championship, and it has repeatedly failed over and over again. And until they sort that aspect of it out, they will always wind up, basically being a mediocre team, no matter how great a player you put onto that roster, or how many superstars you put to, you collectively try to throw together, or how much money you throw out there to the free agents and things of that nature. There has to be a better mentality in their approach of how they're forming the team that they want going out there to compete. And I know people are going to harp in on, they were a foot from shooting that three, Durant shooting that three to getting them to the Eastern Conference Finals and probably going to win a chip or whatever the case may be. Forget all of that. Okay. It's exactly what it is when we talk about the Brooklyn Nets, right? So here we have two teams now, again, talented rosters, but when you look at them collectively, they're not going to beat the Milwaukee Bucks. They're not going to beat the Boston Celtics. I'm saying? They're probably not going to be good enough to beat the Atlanta Hawks or other teams that we'll be talking about. So it just seems like they always kind of hit that middle ground, and it can't elevate themselves beyond what, what they exact themselves to when you look at both of these rosters.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're different, but I think is ironically when you're looking at the over under, they have almost the exact same win total projection, like 37.5 is the over under on both of these teams, but very different situations. Chicago's fine trying to figure out a way to manufacture more consistent offense, more NBA now offense. I think Billy Donovan is out there saying like, yeah, we got to figure out a way to incorporate the three ball more into our offense here moving forward, while still playing at least league average defense, right? And on the Brooklyn side, we already know that Kyrie and KD gave them kind of, hedged them a little bit too in terms of the wins, in terms of where now the roster currently stands. That was a nice spot that they got last year, but they're not going to have that this year. So now is Mikal Bridges ready to be that guy, if you will, that we saw towards the latter end of the season where teams and defenses are going to focus in on him. And I know, and I don't want to get into a whole tangent on it, but I think the discourse on Ben Simmons is probably, it's where it ultimately needs to be. So he can't really bottom out any worse. So if he's any semblance, like even 25% better than he was last year, that's a big win for Brooklyn. And they're saying all the right things, and he seems to be excited about what his role is ultimately going to be here. So those two teams, I think Chicago and Brooklyn, they have a lot of question marks in terms of their ability to be consistent, their ability to stay healthy when it comes to Brooklyn side of it, especially on the Ben Simmons aspect. But ultimately should be right there competing for a play-in spot, with two very different styles amongst them.
I have no doubt they're going to be a roster that is going to be competitive, right? They are going to be two teams that are going to knock off a couple of the top tier teams at critical moments, and they're going to be right there, and they are going to be playing worthy, so to speak, right? Where they play themselves out again, Shaw, is what versions of them are they going to be at the end of the season? Are they going to be tapped out? Because you saw how the Brooklyn Nets as a team tapped out. Like they just didn't have enough in the tank for them to compete on the level of excitement that people felt once they came hot out the gate after the trades had taken place. And you look at the Chicago Bulls, so much was heavily dependent upon DeMar DeRozan, which how much longer can you put on the legs of what, a 37, 30, 38-year-old at this point with DeMar DeRozan? And now with the injury to Lonzo Ball, again, the roster is going to be asking certain players to step up and fill in with the uniqueness of talent that you were getting from Alonzo Ball to be applied with the rest of the roster. I'm just saying at critical points during the season, that is okay because you can feel that stuff out. But what it translates to when we're talking about the end of the season, in order to play yourselves in, into the semifinals, into the conference finals, I don't know if they have enough of that, and we're still going to be, it's a wait and see situation. We're going to have to see how that all progresses through the course of the year. The problem is that they arguably are in the worst divisions to be able to do that, because it's going to be a constant struggle. They can't, sleep on the idea that they can patiently wait for this to come to them. It's going to have to happen quickly, because when it comes to the teams that they're playing with, whether you're Chicago, and you're dealing with Milwaukee, you're dealing with Indiana, if you're dealing with, if you're the Brooklyn Nets and you're dealing with the likes of the 76ers, you're dealing with the likes of the Boston Celtics, it's a gauntlet, no matter how you see it. So that they're not going to have that turnover time or that patience of time for these things to kind of turn up when they need to. It's got to be turned up immediately in order to hang with those teams, to give anyone confidence that they have the potential to be a team to play themselves in.
Well, I mean, I think all very well said, and ironically, and DeRozan's only 34. You put a lot of age, you put a couple more years on him, but he's been in the league for a little while though. And
those days in Toronto, but I think stressed him and me out so much more that I gave him a couple years more than necessary. I'm sorry.
No, but it's interesting. I think within this tier, you again looking at what projected over unders were, and we did not even look at this as we were doing our tier system. All these teams are with a game and a half of each other, one way or the other. Chicago and Brooklyn are at 37.5. I think Orlando is at 36.5, and then Toronto is at 36.5. So that's all within a game of each other, really, and two teams tied exactly with what their projected win totals or what the over under would be. So I think we did a good job, and even in looking at this without even thinking about it or looking at what the Vegas odds were, and that's where again a game or two flips this entire tier on its on its axis, one way or the other.
Absolutely. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Coming up, we're going to be talking about our tier 3, tier 2s, and then who are the boss players, the ones that we know are definitely the ones to beat in the Eastern Conference. You don't want to miss out. But before we do that, hey, if you like using debit over credit, I just learned something that's definitely a game changer. It's called Discover Cashback Debit. It's a checking account that rewards everyone with cash back on everyday purchases, which means you can get cash back on tickets for the game, snacks, team merch, all with no fees, making this basketball season a total win. Check out eligibility and terms at discover.com/cashbackdebit. Discover Bank, member FDIC. More Baseline Eastern Conference preview here on The Baseline. We are back. Callie Warren Shaw, Baseline NBA podcast, and this is our Baseline Eastern Conference preview covering the 2023-24 NBA season, discussing all the teams in the Eastern Conference. And so, Shaw, we broke down tier 5, tier 4, right? Tier 5s, we said these stats, really no chance. Tier 4s are, they played out. There are going to be a couple teams that we know they're going to have an opportunity to play themselves in a tournament. We don't think that they're good enough to probably elevate themselves into the deep run playoff conversation, but certainly they're going to be, fighting for an opportunity for them to get themselves into the tournament and see where it takes them. Now we got to talk about the teams that we're definitely confident they are playing worthy, playing ready, and whether or not we think that they'll be able to compete with the the better teams that we'll be discussing in a few, I think is what's going to be the remaining question. Is the roster constructed in a manner where we have confidence that they can take out the likes of a Miami, Philadelphia, maybe, or Boston or Milwaukee? Who knows? But for our tier 3s, who we got locked in will be the New York Knicks, the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Indiana Pacers, and the Atlanta Hawks. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, Shaw. I'm a little sketchy about the Atlanta Hawks. You're going to have to talk me off of this ideological thinking that the Atlanta Hawks are that good enough still of a basketball team that they can compete with the roster constructions of what we've seen from the Knicks, the Cavaliers, and the Indiana Pacers, especially over the last couple of years. Because of these 4 teams that I think has taken a regression in the confidence of them being able to compete when it comes to getting to the playoffs. But maybe in the regular season, it may look good. They may actually look better than expected. The Atlanta Hawks just doesn't do it for me. Even while they have as talented a backcourt as you can talk about with Murray and with Young.
Yeah, I can understand that, and I know you haven't been traditionally the biggest Atlanta Hawks guy. I don't just don't think you're a big Trae Young guy in general, but Atlanta, some addition by subtraction, I think with the John Collins move, it opens up Sadiq's Bey ability to potentially, be a starting power forward for them as a stretch forward, if you will. Obviously, a little bit undersized, but alongside DeAndre Hunter or flipping one of those two guys, whatever, at the 3 and 4 spots. So keeping spacing on the floor kind of ad nauseum, alongside Trae Young, and then hopefully you get a return from Clint Capella. Kongu is another guy who they're looking to take another big step up this year. And then don't forget Quinn Snyder, one of the better coaches in the NBA by most people's account, now getting a full year to implement his system and how he ultimately wants this Atlanta Hawks team to play. So I think, the combination of the Hawks with Murray and Young kind of getting another year together under their belt, and also Snyder, like I said, instituting his system, gives me a little bit more confidence about what this team can be, because I don't think we've seen the best of DeAndre Hunter. He was on on my breakout list here in the episode we did a couple weeks ago. I think Okongwu still has more to go, as I alluded to a little bit a while ago, and even a guy like Jalen Johnson, I think on this roster is somebody who they really expect to kind of maybe take another leap too. So I want to say a leap, but again, to be a contributing guy coming off their bench. So with that, still Bogdanovich was hurt a good part of last year as well. There's a lot of positives, I think, again, if everybody can remain healthy and understand the role definement that Quinn Snyder is going to set out for them.
Yeah, look, I'm of the mindset that, in order for you to be a basketball team that is going to give yourself a chance, you have to account for all of your mismatch situations. And to me, what really has stuck out to me about the Atlanta Hawks is that they have always been a remarkably small basketball team, and they've played small. And so when they deal with teams that carry size against them, they just don't seem to play particularly well. They don't seem to shield and protect Trae Young enough, because, again, for him and his size, he's particularly a small guard who has the responsibility of having to match up. And I think that's part of the reason why it was so important that they got a Dejounte Murray, because they have length now. Where they lack in size, they can make up for is in length and their ability to be a long basketball team. I look at this roster, Shaw, and again, this team is going to contend with teams that are going to be bigger than them, going to be more physical than them, and probably is going to bully them around. So what do you do in order to, offset that? You've got to be faster. You've got to be quicker. The ball's got to move, and you've got to be very heady. And I don't know where those components are going to, land for the Atlanta Hawks. I think, to your point, it's really going to come down to what kind of philosophy, what kind of system is Quinn Snyder really going to kind of instill in these guys for them to be the type of team that I think potentially we'd love to see them be. But in the end, will it all come out? Would it all come together? I think this is what's going to make this season so interesting, as far as watching teams go through their progressions, through the beginning of the season, at the end of the season. Am I going to say they're a 500 basketball team? No, I think they'll be better than a 500 basketball team. You have too many talented pieces there for them not to be a above 500 basketball team. But I think you will very quickly see whether or not they're going to be serious contenders if you play to the likes of the Milwaukee Bucks and you get lambasted. Your front court can't, hang with a Brook Lopez, Giannis Antetokounmpo combination, where you get lambasted dealing with the likes of a Tobias Harris and a Joel Embiid combination, or the Boston Celtics when you've got the combination of a Jason Tatum and a Kristaps Porzingis. You look at that team. And I look at the Atlanta Hawks and I say to myself, man, don't let them play against a tall, bigger team, because they will probably body them, every single time, twice on Sunday. Now, with that being said, you look at the other rosters that are constructed with the New York Knicks, the Cleveland Cavaliers, and the Indiana Pacers. There's a lot more versatility there, even if they don't have the ability to have some like dynamic players, which I challenge now that they do all have dynamic players and that they should all be competitive teams. It'll be interesting when you look at those other three teams, Shaw, which would probably give you more confidence that they could see themselves playing in an Eastern Conference Finals more so than the other three teams that we put into this tier.
I mean, I think even if you're looking at where the over under is on some of these teams, Cleveland has the highest ceiling by most people's accounts. They projected over under of 50 and a half. While the Knicks, I think, are somewhere around 47. But the Knicks beat Cleveland and beat them pretty easily in the playoffs last year. Cleveland isn't very different from last year, with the exception of adding Strus and I think Korkmaz as well too. Ultimately, though,
Did
the
you like
Knicks
those
feel.
moves, by the way, though? Did you like those moves by Cleveland to get Korkmaz and Strus? And did you think that was all that they needed, given the way that they got ousted by the New York Knicks and the way that they played through the course of the year?
Yeah, I wouldn't say, and I said Korkmaz is George Niang, my bad.
Oh, yeah,
Korkmaz is still in
okay.
Philadelphia. So Niang is the one, I often get them in terms of their skill set confused, but they look nothing alike.
I mean,
Anyway, but Niang is a guy
just one or
that's
two
there.
syllables off from either one of them. Don't worry about that.
But Niang and Strus, again, they provide some shooting for them at that. I thought they were going to end up walking away from Karis LeVert. They did not. He returns. But really in a kind of a Donovan Mitchell prove it year for them. This is a Cleveland team that really feels like, hey, like this, they were close last year, and now with another year under their belt, similarly, can they now take another leap? But I don't know if Strus and Niang are enough. They give them what they were lacking in terms of the shooting, but again, I just don't know if it puts them over the proverbial hump, when it comes to making a challenge and getting into the second round or even the third round of the Eastern Conference playoffs, as you're alluding to. So for me, I wouldn't necessarily put money on them. I think the Knicks, to some degree with the coaching acumen of Thibs could surprise people if he can continue to keep Randall in happy, if you will. And I don't know if that's even the right terminology, but engaged. I guess that's the best way to put it. Keeping Randall engaged with whatever his role is and whatever the team ultimately needs. And that's a big if, I think, for Thibodeau and company. But obviously, we like Jalen Brunson there. It's funny when you talked about this in the beginning in terms of the tiers that you were questioning Atlanta the most. I thought most people would question Indiana in this space because they were really coming from the bottom, if you will, weren't even in the play-in last year. And now we're kind of saying that they're almost a lock for a playoff spot, probably as a 6th seed. That shows a lot about, I think, what we think about Tyrese Halliburton as a leader and what his work did even in the summer as well too, bringing in Obi Toppin as well, now freeing himself from the shackles of Tom Thibodeau in New York and seeing how this team will now ultimately play. But they also have some questions with Buddy Hield potentially wanting a trade out of there too. So a lot of intrigue, I think, with all these teams in this tier, and they can probably sort themselves out, in any order, and we wouldn't be surprised.
Absolutely. Look, Cleveland Cavaliers, they need a rebound of basketball, bro. They of teams that you feel excited to, where I question them is, I don't want to say I'm questioning their heart. I'm just questioning their toughness, their ability to be physical when necessary in order to give their offense the chances and opportunities that I think a lot of people would love to see flourish. They're not as automatic as, say, when we talk about the Golden State Warriors or the Phoenix Suns, right? Like, they don't have automatic type tone setters like that. They've got exciting ball players, but guys like Darius Garland, guys like Spider Mitchell, they all need time to warm up. They don't just come out the box. If that does happen, the Cleveland Cavaliers are in for a great night. But that doesn't happen with the way that they're set up, the way that they play their game. Like, it takes them time for them to actually get into their rhythm, get into their groove. I'd be very interested to see like where they rank as far as points scored within the first and second quarters of last year. But when I just look at how the Cleveland Cavaliers, if they are struggling, it takes them quite some time before they find their rhythm and things start happening. And part of that problem is because of their inability to give themselves opportunities, whether it be offensively or defensive in their rebounding section. So to me, Shaw, and again, this is part of the reason why we talk about how, if you're a bigger team, it doesn't necessarily be it has about height. It has to be about positioning yourself and giving yourself those opportunities to score the basketball, whether it be below the basket or whether you got your shooters ready to shoot up on the fly on the putbacks and stuff. So that to me is what stands out when I think about the Cleveland Cavaliers. And then I think the same argument could be said when you look at the New York Knicks, because they're a basketball team that relies on this rhythm of getting things going. They, to me, are the more physical team of the teams that we were just talking about. And it'll be interesting to see how they can use that to capitalize. I would love to see, Tibbs really instill on Julius Randle and those guys. Like, I don't think you have to worry about that with Hartenstein. I think he just needs the reputable minutes for him to be able to go out there and do what he's given those guys. But he gives them a level of toughness that I think that if Tibbs got into Randall's ear and say, bro, you could easily be the rebounding champion this year. Like, you could easily be a double doubles guy like every single night. If he sold him more on that than worrying about him having to score the basketball, because now they've got Jalen Brunson, I think that team would be better off. I think there would be more of a balance in their backcourt, front court ability for them to challenge against the better teams that are in the Eastern Conference because of that. We don't know whether that's going to be the case, but I have more confidence because I've seen glimpses of that a lot more when the Knicks are right than I have seen between the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Indiana Pacers. Whether that translates to them making deep runs, for the playoffs, I don't know. I'm just saying that for the Knicks, that to me at least gives me an identity for them that I'm still searching for when I talk about the Cleveland Cavaliers. And I agree with everything you're talking about with the Indiana Pacers. I think of all of the teams that has all those components that could easily just shoot up right past them, and people are, where do they come from? The Indiana Pacers, because I think what was missing is having a guy go out there and get those buckets with confidence. You can rely on him. Tyrese Halliburton is that dude. I think he's proven it. And I think if he stays on course like that, the rest of it will come together for the Pacers, and they're a team that people should look out for.
Yeah, I mean, a lot to unpack there. I think, as always, with the Knicks, just kind of circling back to recap the tier, if you will. RJ Barrett still, at least in our minds, think he has another level, and at some point, we're going to stop expecting that to happen. I think he might just be what he is, and that's not a bad basketball player, but not necessarily an all-star basketball player. So if he's able to kind of, inch more towards all-star level, if you will, like at least even fringe all-star, that gives the Knicks so much more wiggle room. Circling back to Cleveland, we said in their top two, at least I did, while I love, and I really do like Darius Garland's game, I do think he needs to take a step back in terms of scoring to allow Evan Mobley to progress offensively as well, too. And if that happens, again, that's where Cleveland can make some hay. But some of that is also pace related, too. So even they just increase the pace a little bit more, then, there's more buckets to kind of go around, more possessions to go around, and more ways to impact, I think, on the offensive side. So those are things that I think I'm concerned about when it comes to those two teams specifically. But they were right there within each other. They were the 4 and 5 seeds. And we'll see if they're going to be challenged, again, by the Atlantas or Indianas of the world, too. And I'm really excited to see Obi Toppin unleash, as I was alluding to a little bit before. Second year, of Mathurin as well, too. What he gets done, they shipped Chris Duarte's butt out of town, so Mathurin and those guys can get some more minutes. So Indiana is a really, really intriguing team to watch this season, but I think Halliburton's a real star in that team, on that roster.
Absolutely. All right, Shaw. So let's now transition ourselves and talk about that tier 2, right? And we really only have 2 teams. When we talk about tier 2, we're saying these are the teams that you want to look out for because they have a shot to be contenders. They should never be overlooked. They definitely are going to be in the playoff picture, no question. And they could be one of the teams that's going to challenge our top tier teams, at some shape or in some way, shape, or form. So we're talking about the Miami Heat and the Philadelphia 76ers. And I'm sure people are saying, well, why don't you have the Miami Heat as one of the top tier teams and stuff like that? Look, let's keep it 100, okay? Even by all accounts, we didn't even think the Miami Heat were that good enough to get into the playoffs, and they squeaked by. One, they handled their business, but 2, a couple teams fell short of what they were supposed to do as well, too, okay? But with that being said, Shaw, we're not trying to say that the Miami Heat doesn't deserve it. Clearly, the culture, the coaching, and the just the grittiness of Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo are going to constantly keep them in that conversation. But it's hard pressed how much longer they can continue to keep doing that, knowing that the teams that are probably ahead of them are going to be marketably better than what they can potentially be. Even now, after the free agency is dried up, the well has dried up on potential players and things of that nature that the Miami Heat are going to need in order to bolster that roster. I mean, is it really going to be that you can put this on the shoulders of Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo again for them to replicate what they did last year?
Yeah, it is a tall order, but we talked about it in our media day episode last week that this is a roster and team that has a lot of confidence, and that does take you a long way, especially when your leader is Jimmy Butler and he walks around with the swag that he does and instilling confidence within his guys. Had opportunity to go to even a couple more practices since media day, and it's just really interesting to see him and the dynamic he's already developed with the rookie Jaime Jaquez, and Jaquez is already saying that Jimmy Butler was his favorite player coming into the league, so ironically now he gets to be on the same team with his favorite player and learn from him. It looks like he's going to be a potential rotation player for this roster. Duncan Robinson, Josh Richardson, Caleb Martin, all these guys could start on other teams, right? They could be 4th and 5th starters on other teams, and these guys are almost assuredly coming off the bench here in Miami. So despite the perceived depth that they lost, they have a lot of guys with similar skill sets per se in terms of the NBA tier of talent per se, not necessarily in terms of duplication of what they do. And I think that makes Miami one of those teams that you always kind of have to watch out for, in addition to obviously having Jimmy and Bam, 2 perennial all-stars on that roster as well too. We already talked about, we need to watch the Kyle Lowry situation, how that rolls out. But with Tyler Hero coming back, presumably very motivated from all the rumors, I wouldn't put Miami out of this tier in any capacity. I think they're going to be right there fighting, for a 3 and potentially even a 2 seed, despite what some people see as a talent disparity, because they didn't land Damian Lillard.
All right, so why don't we believe the Philadelphia 76ers? Naturally, we put them there because you can't have an MVP like Joel Embiid, and you can't have a roster like the Philadelphia 76ers roster and not say to yourself, okay, they should be, projecting themselves in conference finals conversations, like, no question. And yet we always seem to fall short of that level of confidence with them, whether it be something regarding coaching, whether it be something in regards to the player dynamic. Right. And look, I'm not even considering James Harden into the situation, albeit if you did have an engaged James Harden, a James Harden who felt right, we would easily be putting him in probably tier 1. Right. But why is it that we still don't even have that confidence in doing it, even if we wanted to believe that?
Well, I think there's obviously the belief in Joel Embiid. Nick Nurse, different situation here now, coming in as a rookie coach in Philadelphia, but not as a rookie coach. He's obviously won an NBA championship. Rumors out of media day already saying that the movement is a lot different and a lot better than it has been, in previous years. And that's even with Harden coming into the situation late. But if everybody really does get a chance to touch the basketball and not just watch James and Joel do their thing for as long as James is there specifically, then this team has a much higher ceiling, I think, with the ball moving, especially allowing Tyrese Maxey to create and do a little bit more offensively. And I think, the addition of Pat Beverly will help them on the perimeter. We'll see how it goes in the locker room. But Kelly Oubre is also there, in addition to Tobias Harris, consistently wanting and having the capabilities to do more, but I think being limited by the role he's been asked to play. And at the end of the day, he's like, hey, I'm getting almost $40 million a year. I'll do whatever. But I think he knows that he has more to give on both sides of the basketball. So to me, they're still a very, very good basketball team. Whatever ends up happening with Harden, one way or the other, still have Anthony Melton on this roster as well too. And as alluded to, Daniel House and again, I guess I said Kelly Oubre already. But I like the Sixers' chances, and an Embiid who will probably be ultimately even more motivated again, not necessarily to try to go and capture an MVP, but to be like, listen, we can do this, and we can do this, regardless of who's here. If the ball, not to say the ball specifically, but if he can be the rallying point, for this roster and be the leader that this team needs him to be.
Of the 2 teams that we just discussed in this tier, who do you have more confidence to possibly get to an Eastern Conference Finals?
I mean, it has to be Miami because they have less uncertainty, because you just don't know what ends up happening with James. And while I like Joel, at the end of the day, even with him being the leader of the team, they've fallen short of getting to the the Eastern Conference Finals. So I don't know that I'd put money on them over Miami this year. They certainly have the talent to do it, but I think, you just have to go by proven track record here. And Miami is that team, and they'll probably still make a move or two that probably bolsters them before the season is out.
Yeah, I think the key to as well too is like, what version of Joel Embiid are you going to see come playoff time, right? Do we see, like, I think it's nice that Joel Embiid won the MVP, right? It was great, awesome, right? But that version of Joel Embiid is not the Joel Embiid that's going to get them to the Eastern Conference Finals. It's not going to be the version that's even going to get them to an NBA Finals, and it won't be a version of him that's going to get the chip. It's not the numbers, it's the mentality and the attitude, and it's the level of dominance. And I wonder if Pat Beverly, I'm not saying this is all on Pat Beverly. If people do not get this twisted, I'm not saying that Pat Beverly is their savior, but Pat Beverly gives a level of heady and chippiness in his star plays. Like, he's always up in those dudes' ears, right? And that was one of the reasons why I'm losing our boy PJ Tucker. That was the reason why he came back to Philly. He wanted to be that guy in Joel Embiid's ear to instill a level of confidence of what he's going to need to do to be the MVP. So now the next step is, now that you're the MVP, now that you got what you wanted, right? You wanted to be MVP of the league. What is that going to translate? And what is that going to mean for the Philadelphia Sixers eventually getting themselves into an NBA Finals they haven't done since back in 2000, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, that's what I want to see, is what version of Joel Embiid is going to elevate this team when it really matters the most, because the numbers are not going to mean anything. And we saw that with Djokovic, right? Djokovic found another level that not only challenged the MVP version of it, but it was the level that was Jokic. Nikola Jokic.
Yeah, Djokovic. I think that's the tennis guy, isn't it?
I didn't say Djokovic. Did I say Djokovic?
You did.
No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I said Kirk Mossford and I meant Yang, so we're both, both having a day.
There you go. Yeah, but basically with Jokic, he had another level that challenged not only Embiid, but was the level necessary for the Denver Nuggets to win their first NBA championship. And that, to me, I think is the key when we talk about these guys in the spotlight. And of course, that's going to be one of the reasons why we're talking about our next tier and the guys that are going to be the teams that are participating in that tier. So you do not want to miss out as we discuss and we continue our coverage of the NBA Baseline Conference Preview here. Cal, Warren Shaw, keep us locked. All right, we are back. Cal, Warren Shaw, Baseline NBA Podcast, as we continue our coverage discussing the Eastern Conference, previewing the teams. We done ran through most of the tiers. We got one tier left. But before we do, for you guys getting yourselves ready for the NBA season, we know that you need to get dripped up and dipped out the way that is necessary. So remember, if you're looking for the best NBA gear, then look no further than with the NBA store. With a huge selection of authentic and high-quality products, including jerseys, hats, and accessories, the NBA store has everything you need to show off your team pride. Plus, with exclusive and limited edition items, you can make your collection truly one of a kind. And with an online presence, you can shop from anywhere in the world. So don't miss out on the latest trends and experiences and visit the NBA store today by clicking our affiliate link. If you're listening to us on your favorite audio platform, be sure to check out the link in the description of the show. The Baseline is working in affiliation with the NBA store /Fanatics and will be compensated for your patronage by utilizing our link. And as always, we thank you for your support. So be sure to go to nbastore.vwz6.net/baseline. All right, Shaw. In our final segment, we obviously got to talk about the top tier teams. We call them the conference bosses, the big dogs. You know what I'm saying? And they're moving weight all over across the Eastern Conference. These are the teams that are going to be hard to knock off. The Milwaukee Bucks and the Boston Celtics, respectively. Obviously, in our mind, we believe that these are the two teams that are going to ultimately face off each other in the Eastern Conference Finals. Listen, what more can be said? The Milwaukee Bucks did what was necessary to position themselves in a way that they feel is going to be competitive, not just to win the conference, but ultimately win the championship. And the Boston Celtics felt like we need to make sure that we are hanging with these dudes if they're going to get themselves a Dame Lillard. So we might as well go ahead and get their boy, Jrue the Damager, Jrue the Damager, and put them on our roster. So now when you look at this, I don't know how it plays out. I don't know if you feel any more confident about the Boston Celtics or you feel uber confident about the Milwaukee Bucks. But basically, when you look at these rosters constructions and what they've endured from last year's disappointments, they are going to be angry, they're going to be mad, they're going to be motivated, and they could very well be on a collision course to face off each other as the respective Eastern Conference finalists.
These two teams are, again, the elite of the elite, and it's a push. I think it's just a matter of who do you believe in, maybe a little bit more, and then it's like small intangibles, and those things ultimately do make the difference. Milwaukee. The only reason I'd put them slightly, and I mean just slightly below Boston, is they also have a rookie head coach. There's a lot of coaching changes going into this, and I know Dame and Giannis can make up for a lot of coaching mistakes. But that would be the only reason why I'd be like, okay, maybe I'll give Boston a slight edge over Milwaukee going into the season. But if Griffin is worth the proverbial salt that a lot of us think he probably is, hence getting the job, then maybe that will ultimately be a negligible situation. And we already talked about it before. If Middleton returns to any semblance of form, that puts Milwaukee square in front. I think of most of the teams here in the Eastern Conference, with the exception of Boston, as alluded to. I love what they did with Malik Beasley. They still have Bobby Portis. Jay Crowder should finally get some minutes here now as well, too, in whatever role, I think is appropriate for him. They got Campaign off the scrap heap, and he comes in now to back up Dame. So they have some competency there. Maybe could use maybe one more shooter after losing Grayson Allen, but again, that's where Beasley will get an opportunity here. But remember, they had Beasley and Allen, going into this, before the Dame trade. But Dame also is obviously the elite level shooter. So, it may or not be an issue one way or the other. And if Brook Lopez can continue to stroke the three ball in the way that he has, then again, maybe that all becomes negated. You just wonder where they are defensively now, with the result of losing Jrue Holiday, and do they have enough to kind of make up for that loss on the perimeter?
Yeah, so I'm going to actually flip the script on you on this one, Shaw, and I have more confidence in the Milwaukee Bucks than I do with the Boston Celtics. And even though I'm always the person who talks about how coaching is so important, I feel like, as it always comes down to as well, too, and it's been said, that the players go out and they have to play, right? And so you arguably have one of the most dogged players out there in the game of basketball. And I've always believed this, the most dominant player in the game of basketball is Giannis Antetokounmpo. That doesn't mean that, he's always an MVP person. But what I'm saying is that at any given night, when his body is right and his mentality is right, as far as what he takes to win, he's hard to stop. He can literally be unguardable. He's literally, the Eastern Conference version of Anthony Davis, who doesn't have a jump shot and yet still figures out a way to drop 50 and get you 15. You know what I'm saying? Literally in his sleep. And also he's a defensive monster when, when he's putting it on, you know what I'm saying, as well, too. Like, he just has all of those components, and there's nowhere for us to not think differently. And he will always be a matchup nightmare for a team like the Boston Celtics. And what makes it worse is now you have a clutch shooter in which you take off the pressure of Giannis having to want to be that dominant guy every single game. You actually now have strategy. So we'll see if whether or not Adrian Griffin, you know what I'm saying, it, figures out a way to make it work for them. But this is what I've been waiting to see from the Boston Celtics. And you could throw as many ball players out there as possible. I still think it still comes down to Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. And it comes down to what version of these guys want to start playing like when it matters the most, especially in the playoffs. You get glimpses of it at times, but you never get the consistency of it. And if the voice of the locker room is going to rest on a guy like Jrue Holiday, the Celtics are going to fall short. I've said this, and we've talked about this before we, get on shows and record and everything like that. Obviously, we're Celtics fans respectively, but the leadership capabilities and the voice of that team, I really needs to resonate from a guy like Jaylen Brown. I think of all of those guys, he's the one is the most viable leader for that basketball team, where if he really buys into Missoula, if he buys into the system, buys into the culture, he can let his voice and his attitude and his demeanor, how he prepares and how he carries himself, all of that can resonate with those guys. It can have an influence on the Porzingis who doesn't understand. It can have an influence on the young guys like Jordan Walsh and these guys that are making up for what's going to be a lack of depth that the Celtics are going to have to, fight over as they go through the course of the regular season, because some of these guys are going to go through their growing pains. But at the end of the day, Show, when you look at the rosters respectively, I agree with you. It literally can be a push. And I think it's just going to come down to those little intangibles of those market improvements that you see through the course of the year that ultimately resonate on whether or not they have enough of whoever they're going to play against opposite of them when it comes to playing in the conference finals.
I agreed there. I think Boston needs to figure out what they're doing at the front court situation as that third big. It can't be Luke Cornett. It
can't be that dude.
It just can't be. I'm on the campaign right now. I mean, I think he's a fine individual and, fine human being. I just don't see him as a viable.
So Stephen A. I love the dude. You know what I'm saying? That's my boy.
As a viable playoff rotation guy, I'm not convinced. So, whatever they end up ultimately doing there, whether that's Wenyen Gabriel or somebody else we haven't discussed yet, that's the situation that they ultimately need to figure out. News right before we recorded, somehow, some way, Peyton Pritchard has survived everything and wanting to leave Boston and signed a 4-year extension right before we recorded on this. So, I guess maybe he's worked on some of his ball handling and he can really kind of slide into that true backup point guard or backup just guard position. But hopefully he'll be able to create a little bit as well too, and not just be a glorified, 3-point shooter who can sometimes get hot from that range. Boston has a lot of questions still, but talent wise, they are one of the more elite teams in the NBA. And sometimes that talent is enough, but I love what they did on the coaching sidelines as well in the offseason to kind of give Missoula some assistance. And that's why I think they can really make a push with Milwaukee to be one of the better teams, not only in the conference, but in the NBA.
All right. So when we talk about top tier teams in the Eastern Conference, and we'll round this out, how many wins do you think it's going to take for them to be the top seeded team in the East?
I'm going to say 54, 55, somewhere along that. I don't think, any of these teams are going to push to be like a 60-win team. And I don't know that that's what it's going to take to win the Eastern Conference per se. While I do think these are the two best teams in the conference, they're going to have to go out west and go against some teams that are going to give them some challenges, especially when, in the dog days, if you will, of some of the NBA season. So that's why I think, it kind of like knocks things down, where you're not going to get in 58, 60 win territory, but 54, 55 should be able to get it done for a top seed out there.
Yeah. I mean, listen, 58 got them, top seed if you're the Milwaukee Bucks. And to your point, I think now that you have a top heavy roster, it's going to be important for Adrian Griffin to make sure that he is managing. I didn't say load manage, but I'm saying he's going to have to make sure he manages the roster in a way that his star players are going to be healthy, for the stretch run. Because I think at the end of the day, Shaw, one would surmise maybe the Cleveland Cavaliers can certainly give the Milwaukee Bucks a run as far as division goes. But in the end, I don't think it's going to really, I don't think they're going to be able to hang. And maybe at some point, Bickerstaff is not going to sit here and push these guys when he knows that they're going to be readily positioned like they were last year to be a 4 seed, maybe a 3 seed, you know what I mean? Or something like that. So, I mean, respectively, when you look at the top ended teams that we've been discussing, I think they all are going to be in a position, unless they get off to slow starts, that they'll be ready to go. And I think to your point, as we get to the back end of that season, back end of the season, if they sniff 60, they don't really feel as impassioned to have to do it, especially if they've put distances amongst the other teams that are chasing them anyway.
Yeah. Well, hopefully these two teams can be worth the proverbial salt. Everybody wants to see how they look in the regular season against the rest of the competition, but how they look even against themselves. What angst is there between Holiday and the Milwaukee Bucks, when Boston plays Milwaukee ultimately? Can he lock up Dame, et cetera, et cetera? But there's still 13 other teams in the conference that is like, well, hold up, don't count us out just yet, even if we're counting out some of those at the bottom already ourselves.
Absolutely, man. This has been another awesome preview, my dude. You know what I'm saying? Again, we come at it from so many different angles, try to spice it up a little bit. You know what I'm saying? We're covering all of these teams. All of them, have obviously a project list of goals that they wish to achieve. But right now, we just only see 2 teams that seem to be the ones closest to probably achieving that goal. What say you guys? Be sure to get at us at NBA Baseline and let us know, is it your favorite team? Is it a team that you believe is a dark horse that people really should be taking into consideration? And why do you think that team should be considered a top tier team, a conference boss? You know what I'm saying? But nonetheless, man, we are got so much to cover before the NBA season starts, man. So don't miss out when we do our Western Conference preview. That's going to be a delight, a hoot nanny, as my man would say. So you definitely want to check that out. And as always, man, we appreciate you and yours for hopping on board with us this week for the Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. We do. And we'll catch up with you next time.